emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 182.PS4303, certificate number 6374, Cape Hatteras Lighthouse.
So, I've decided to turn my half of the Omnibus into basically a lighthouse-based podcast.
You have, lighthouses are a big part of your life and your mystique, your mythos.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you want to live in some kind of a fanciful lighthouse?
I do. I want to live in an 8-sided lighthouse made of dreams.
What would be the downside if it had 7 or 9 sides?
It wouldn't be. Wait a minute. Oh, it was a 7-sided lighthouse made of dreams. I've added an extra side.
Oh,
No,
you've added on.
It was always going to be 7-sided. That's part of how you build a lighthouse out of dreams.
It does seem more mystical if it's an odd number, all the Orgone energies in the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like it's occult geometries are probably a result of it having an odd number of sides.
It's based on the Kabbalah,
for sure.
So I do like to do lighthouses, and by like to do lighthouses, I mean that I've done one other show on them. And, I mentioned...
I thought you meant like in the sense of like visiting a lighthouse. Like I want to do farmers markets or I want to do antique stores. You want to do lighthouse.
It has occurred to me that touring the lighthouses of the world would be one of those sort of justifying missions. You kind of want to, in your travels, I don't know, how much traveling did you do that was just sort of free form? Not much, right? You always had a mission.
No.
You were either on a literal mission or you were part of a...
My mission is generally, yes, conversion.
Conversion, right?
Religious conversion. When I go on a trip, that's what I'm about.
But then there's you do a lot of speaking tours and stuff, but even when you go on vacation, you usually have a mission.
It's it's regimented.
Yeah.
We're going to see Glacier National Park, kids, whether you like it or not.
But I've done a lot of traveling that's sort of like head west and see what happens. And that means that the traveling is often determined by who I meet in a truck stop bathroom.
And that what you find might be yourself.
That's right.
When you think about it.
Turns out the call was coming from inside the house. But that over the years became kind of, I don't know, it just didn't have enough shape. You end up feeling aimless. You end up feeling like, why am I traveling? It's a lot easier to stay in one place. And so lately I've been looking for reasons to travel. When you travel for work, it's great because you have a reason to be there. It's almost like you're a local.
You can pretend you're not, you can pretend the trip is just part of the, I don't know, it just gives you a justification for it.
Like I'm not in Vienna like the rest of you tourists. I'm here to play a rock show and then I have to go. So yeah, you feel legitimized.
You feel like you've accomplished something with, for business, it's almost never worth the plane flight.
Right.
You're there you might be there for 6 hours and you go to one meeting and you think, well, boy, I sure have accomplished something because of all that travel.
Well, you feel like you've accomplished it when you accomplish something when they send the check. But yeah, to go on a tour of all the lighthouses of the world, the top lighthouses now, and by top, I mean the tallest. There's one in France. There's one in Italy.
The tallest lighthouse is in France?
Yeah, there's another.
Oh, interesting. Lighthouses are pretty good destinations.
Lighthouses are great. It would require that you do additional travel. You can't just fly to an airport and then take a bus to a lighthouse.
The lighthouse is often very far from the airport.
Yeah, you have to get, by definition. There's usually a lighthouse at the airport, a beacon of some kind, but that's not where ships are.
You don't want to fly around seeing air traffic control towers?
No, it's less exciting because lighthouses are architectural marvels.
But they're also built in beautiful spots. Like even the dumbest lighthouse, most utilitarian or smallest or whatever, is probably on just a gorgeous piece of coastline.
Yeah, somewhere on the ragged edge of the world, right? They're the fourth tallest lighthouse is in Russia, in St. Petersburg.
Oh, wow.
You've got some Chinese lighthouses. Let's see, how far down do you have to go? Oh, there's one in Argentina that would be fun to visit. A Dutch lighthouse. So anyway...
man has always dreamed of visiting lighthouses. Fully 1/7 of the wonders of the ancient world were lighthouses. That's as many as were pyramids when you think about it.
Sure.
That's pretty good representation.
And the wonderful thing about visiting the tallest lighthouses of the world is like 8 of them are in France. So all you have to do is go to France and you can knock them off.
Why is France building such tall lighthouses? What period are they from? Are these 20th century lighthouses?
No, a lot of them are, there's the Côte d'Ouan lighthouse, which was built in 1611.
1611?
Yeah. Well, like you say, lighthouses were a feature of the ancient world. And they were bad lighthouses, as we discussed in the Fresnel lens episode, which we will refer to many times in this episode.
Like, what do you mean they were bad? They were just like lit occasionally? Like if the guy remembered?
No, I mean, they were lit with whale oil and the lenses were just some, originally no lens at all. And then
just a guy with a fire. That's what it was in Alexandria.
A fire on the top of a big stone tower that couldn't survive an earthquake or even a big storm.
This is a little broader, but I do believe in this idea of having some kind of list for the traveler. Yeah. Because it really does make you feel like, if you want to feel like you're aimless, that's its own fun thing. But often travelers just want to feel like they've accomplished something. And there's a whole class of people out there that do that by deciding they are going to see every UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Sure,
that would be a hard one.
That guy that went around to every Starbucks in America, It's a never-ending quest, right?
For a while, they were building Starbucks faster than he was visiting them, so he was watching it recede. But then, luckily, the economy collapsed, and then I think he was able to accomplish it.
He did. He finally got to all of them. Now when they build one, he can just go over a weekend.
To count it, he had to have a drink at all of them.
Yeah, sure.
So he's dead now.
Well, those street corners in Manhattan where there used to be 4 Starbucks, one on every corner.
He loves that. That's perfect for him.
My family and I just drove halfway across the country, and coming from Seattle, halfway across the country means 2/3 of the way across the country. Because you think of...
Because we're bad at fractions.
Well, but you think of Ohio as being the middle west, but it's quite a bit further.
We had to cross the big states to get there.
Yeah.
Other people would have just had to cross the little states.
They're like, I'm halfway across. No, you're not. But we drove to Ohio via the northern states and then came back via the southern states.
Teach the controversy.
At the end of the trip, we crossed 21 states. And I was driving with my mother, my sister, my daughter's mother, and my daughter. And each one of the 4 women
had to go to the bathroom every 8 minutes.
They absolutely did. We stopped at every restroom in America. But each one started out the trip with a different number of American states under her respective belt.
Interesting.
Right? My mother had been to 49 states. The only one remaining...
Hopefully on the trip.
Unfortunately, no. It's Maine. She never got to Maine.
You didn't go to Columbus, Ohio via Maine?
We didn't.
Good for lighthouses.
But my sister and my daughter's mother and my daughter each had certain states that they needed to collect in order to, for that ultimate goal of 50. And each one of the 3 got some new, probably 5 new states each. Yeah. And then, of course, my daughter had more because she hadn't been through any of that turf.
Did you ever change the route at any point to get a state that you otherwise would not have bagged?
In fact, yes. As we were driving through the panhandle of Oklahoma, I realized that one of my party had never been to Kansas, and one of my party had never been to Texas. And there's a spot in the panhandle of Oklahoma.
Where Kansas touches Texas.
It doesn't, but you can zig up to liberal Kansas and then zag down into
conservative Texas.
That's right, the panhandle of Texas, and then zig again into New Mexico, which was the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of rules that you apply to how long you have to be in a state to claim it.
Most country counters have to leave the airport. They won't allow a transit lounge.
And I would never allow an airport.
Boo.
But we went to Liberal. We had dinner, or we had a late lunch at a cafe in Liberal. Then we turned across the panhandle of Oklahoma again, down to Texas, where we stopped at a truck stop and got a bag of Fritos, and I had another coffee.
So you have to get out of the car and feel like...
I feel like you have to breathe the air.
That's the Texas thing, really. A cup of coffee at a truck stop. You got the full experience. No rodeo could convey. No South by Southwest could do a better job than that.
And then we went to the Four Corners to try and stand athwart 4 states, but the Four Corners actual hub is controlled by one of the tribes.
It's an Indian reservation.
And they close at 6 p.m. So we got there at 7 and it was closed.
0 corners.
But it turned out we, on my intended path, we actually covered all 4 of those states. So
the tribe can't stop you from just driving in a circle around 4 corners.
And that's
the same number of states.
That's what we did. There were a lot of, so anyway, that felt like a good mission in the sense of, my daughter at the age of 10 and a half has 31 states under her belt.
Wow.
So, I didn't get all 50 states until I was in my 40s.
I think I might have my kids might still be in single digits.
Yeah, right. So it's just another one of the many dumb things that we do to order our lives.
To stave off the specter of aging and death,
yeah, that's right.
I would assume.
Wait, I can't die. I haven't been to all the provinces yet.
Forget mortality. I've got Starbucks to visit.
There are 13 provinces and territories in Canada, and I've been to 9 of them. So I've still got some of those Atlantic provinces.
That's like they added Nunavut just to taunt you. That's like adding Starbucks.
Nunavut did screw me over because I had been to Northwest Territories, but now.
Had you been to both sides of Northwest Territories? Because I think you can count that.
No, unfortunately I hadn't.
You had not been in pre-Nunavut.
No, I hadn't. And Kathleen Edwards once offered me a slot. She said, "Why don't the 2 of us go and travel, like do a tour of the Maritime provinces?" And we'll play all those little places in that area, and she's a big star in Canada.
Sure. She's not from the Atlantic provinces, is she?
No. Oh. She's from Ottawa. But I was like, that's amazing. But I had another show, and it was in Europe, and it was like I would have to get it to the airport and fly to somewhere to meet a float plane that was going to take me up to meet her, and it was a problem of 6 hours, and I couldn't do it. And she ended up doing the tour. And
are you missing some of those? You're missing PEI or whatever.
I am, yeah. But also just I'm devastated that I didn't do that tour. It would have been really fun, and my life would be different today. I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be probably the King of Canada.
You'd be married to Kathleen Edwards, and you guys would be the Governor Generals of Canada.
That's right, and I blew it, and now look at me.
Now you have to hang out with Sloan or something if you want to check those off.
Yeah, I've hung out with Sloan, and that didn't get me any of those provinces because it was in Toronto, and that doesn't. Who cares?
Show up at their houses.
Everybody's been to Toronto.
Hey guys, what's up?
I don't think they live in the provinces anymore. I think they all probably live in Vancouver, like all creative Canadians that are in Toronto. Yeah,
they don't live in Nova Scotia.
Like Vancouver is both the Los Angeles and San Francisco of Canada. Also, it's the Seattle of Canada.
It is. They've been very smart. They've collapsed all those into one city.
It has to do triple duty. It's probably actually the San Diego of Canada.
It's the Honolulu and the Beijing of Canada too.
Is the Anchorage of Canada. It all is in. No, actually,
it does it all.
Actually, I think Whitehorse is probably the Anchorage of Canada.
What's Victoria? Nothing. Victoria seems like it's British. It's like the Bath of Canada or something. The Salisbury of Canada.
It does, but it's probably the Port Townsend of Canada. Actually, the Anchorage of Canada is Edmonton. Because Edmonton feels like Anchorage, except a lot bigger and with kind of a lot less going on.
Well, no scenery.
Well,
right?
And there's nothing happening in Edmonton except fracking, but it's huge.
We haven't angered Edmonton yet, I think, on this show.
Is that right? In all the episodes, we've never insulted Edmonton?
No, we're usually just too busy going all in on Winnipeg.
I kind of like Edmonton, frankly, but it's no good.
I've never been.
Let's be honest.
I like how you're being... You come off very well here.
Look, I'm in favor
I'm
of it.
extremely charitable towards the awful, awful city of Edmonton. But objectively,
Yeah, there's
boy.
you can't say a good thing about it. Another thing it's very hard to say a good thing about
what a segue. What a pro we have here.
is the enormous shoals, the just underwater shoals off of the Outer Banks near Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. It's hard to say a good thing about it because it has wrecked so many ships over the decades.
What if it wrecked bad ships?
It wrecked a lot of bad
What
ships.
if it wrecked empty slave ships?
The thing is, the shoals, I'm not here to say that the shoals have not been the source of a lot of trouble for bad ships, but also for good ships. Enough ships that statistically probably more good ships sank there than bad ships.
And even if a sea captain is very, very evil, that doesn't mean we want him necessarily dead on a rocky shoal.
That's exactly right.
Maybe he could live and move to Edmonton and atone for his sins.
Think about that. Even a terrible ship has one good crew member, surely.
And you don't want him or her torn to pieces.
Nope. Over 600 ships have crashed into the Outer Banks.
Aren't the Outer Banks like sandy? I guess there's rocks out there.
So the Outer Banks are this kind of fascinating. If you look at a map of the United States, the Outer Banks there, and particularly there, and I should say for listeners around the world, what the Outer Banks are is a series of sandy shoals that are off the coast, off the eastern seaboard of the United States.
They're certainly underwater for our future listeners.
Now they are, yeah. Now they're 600 feet underwater because all of the ice has melted. And also the coastline of the eastern seaboard is, 2 miles inland from where it is now?
Right.
It's lapping at the shores of the Appalachian Mountains. But at the time of this show and over the course of the history of the United States as we know it, the shoals kind of protect the eastern seaboard. There's an inland sound between what would be these outer banks and the coastline proper.
And it makes for a nice, like my wife used to go to the Outer Banks as a kid, right? Like the protection of those shoals and whatever those barrier islands are makes for a nice beach inland, I guess.
It's a sandy place. And, we were talking about it before the show. Neither of us have been to the Outer Banks, which is a kind of a tragedy. Been to all 50 states, but never the Outer Banks. So can I
polio
count
was a
them?
tragedy. This is a very small, this is a very minor thing.
I see what you're saying.
Like you and I could have been to the Outer Banks.
At any point in time, we could have made that extra
We've made
trip.
a bunch of choices, but you were like, oh, there's a float plane.
And I've got to get over there. That's a lot of work. And what's out there really, but more sand. And I've been to Hawaii. I don't need to see any more sand.
In the summer, there's probably East Coast kids, frilly dress, bathing suits, frolicking with a puppy.
I believe
sure
that's
it's
what's
great.
happening. Yeah. There's, a kid in a long dress is rolling a hoop down Main Street.
There's pails and shovels galore.
Yeah. Buxton, North Carolina probably has some kind of amusement, but we've never made it there. But I can speak with authority about it because this is the Omnibus and we often are authorities on things we've not personally experienced.
We're going to hear from a lot of Buxtonites. Buxtonians?
The first thing they'll probably say is it's not pronounced Buxton.
That's the first thing people always say.
It's pronounced Bussin, or whatever it is that they say.
I got in trouble the other day for pronouncing the R in Melbourne, Australia, because people there say
Melbourne.
But that's because they don't say the R anywhere. Australian English is not a rhotic dialect.
Right.
So that would be like
Buzzing.
That would be like an Australian person who has to say, I'm going to New York. We don't insist upon that.
Do they pronounce the second T in Toronto?
Toronto.
You get a lot of trouble for that.
If you don't pronounce it.
If you do pronounce, if you say Toronto, you might as well be saying blor, blor, blor.
But isn't the demonym Torontonian?
Torontonian.
That cannot be right.
I don't know. They may never say Torontonian. Torontonian. Toronto.
My neighbor
Toronto.
My neighbor Toronto.
The particularly this part of the Outer Banks, there's actually a way that you can take a little boat and go down the entire east coast of the United States, around Florida and all the way to Texas, the entire time protected more or less by shoals.
Yeah.
So it's it's a calm inland passageway.
They've got them an intercoastal waterway.
Yeah, they do have them one of those, and I've always kind of been curious about taking that as a trip. You'd have to have a purpose, though. Lighthouses. You'd be visiting all
There
the
can't be that
lighthouses.
many lighthouses on the intercoastal waterway.
There are, I
really?
think. Well, because it's such a dangerous place. And I should explain geographically that this point in North Carolina, it's not the furthest eastern point of the United States, which is an honor held by Maine.
Quaddy Head, Maine.
But it is the spot between Boston or Cape Cod and Florida, where there's, a kind of dewlap. What would you say? Like a little point.
Yes.
Not a little
It's the
point.
most protuberant thing between,
Cape Cod and Florida.
America's two wangs.
But really interestingly, if you watch if you take a satellite view of the Gulf Stream, which is this gyre, it's weather gyre and storm gyre,
Which
enormous
was,
one.
we should say to the future,
I
which
guess.
was.
That's right. It
Because
doesn't exist.
we're in the process of destroying it now.
It's been flipped, and now it goes from Ireland down to.
It brings icy air to Miami now
Yeah.
and hot air to Norway.
But at the present moment, it's a counterclockwise spin that goes kind of from Africa across the Atlantic through the Mediterranean, then up around, and it collides halfway up the United States with the Labrador current, which comes down, headed in a counterclockwise direction across the top of the United States and brings cold air down, and they collide right at
Right at the pointy place.
Right at the pointy place there. And you can see the gyre just comes swooping along and goes right out to sea at Cape Hatteras. And the Labrador current takes a slightly different route. It doesn't come swooping down across Virginia, but the cold water really starts right there. And the warm water, Cape Hatteras is the furthest north place where tropical flora and fauna can survive in the United States.
Oh yeah, the Carolinas always have,
monkeys, monkeys and alligators.
Just monkeys and anacondas just hanging around the Duke campus. No, but they do have like Venus flytraps and sundews and like carnivorous plants like that you would not expect that far north.
And it's a wonderful environment there for all I can determine, because looking at the weather patterns, it never gets above 90 degrees and it never gets below 75 degrees. It's basically Honolulu, except without the million people driving around in kind of cars that don't have mufflers.
That's what they should say.
Defining features of Honolulu these days.
The North Carolina license plate used to say first in flight, but now it says Honolulu, except without the millions of drivers driving around in cars without mufflers. Because it just trips off the tongue.
But because of this collision of the two global weather systems, it's also the place in the United States where the hurricanes are most likely to collide with land.
I wondered if you were going there.
Yeah. With hurricanes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're famous for it. They name sports teams after their hurricanes in the Carolinas. Like they're so happy about these awful, murderous weather systems.
And you can see how it would happen if you watched hurricanes form in the Gulf. They spin around and, we're always concerned about whether or not they're going to hit Florida. But whatever they do, even the ones that come in the Gulf of Mexico, they often will go in at Louisiana, but they keep doing their thing and usually come out around North Carolina.
But can we agree that it's weird to name sports teams after natural disasters?
Well, the
Carolina and Miami Hurricanes.
Richland, Washington, their high school mascot is the Atom Bombs. It's not a natural disaster, but it's a weird high school mascot.
I think there's a California soccer team called the Earthquakes. Really, like how many thousands of people have to die before you? Miami Heat is not going to age well. After we start losing thousands of seniors every summer to global
115 degree temperatures with 100% humidity.
Yes, the Seattle Heat Domes.
My band of the 1990s was called the Western State Hurricanes.
I didn't even think about that.
Right,
you're part of the problem.
Well, no, it was a little bit of a joke. We don't have hurricanes here. We have monsoons, and we don't even call them monsoons. What are they? They're cyclones. We have cyclones in the Pacific Ocean. But by the time they get to Washington, they're always just like gnarly windstorms.
We never get anything typhoon-like up here.
And so calling it the Western State Hurricanes was meant to be a little bit of a gag. Also, because the mental hospital here in Washington State is called Western State Hospital. There were a lot of references encoded in our band name. Nobody got them because nobody pays that much attention to things.
Well, they will now.
But they will now. The band, you should buy our release.
It's back on vinyl, right?
That's right. Western State Hurricanes, Through with Love, 2020. So, it was determined many, many, many years ago. In fact, in the era of, just immediately after the American Revolution, that there was enough ship traffic up and down the eastern seaboard that a lighthouse was necessary around Cape Hatteras. And in fact, no less a person than Alexander Hamilton.
What?
Whose ship...
The famous rapper?
That's right. Whose ship bringing him to the United States was almost dashed upon the shoals.
That's true. It's in the play. They're like, and a hurricane came, and there's kind of a goofy light effect.
No, do the whole rap.
I don't know the
Then a hurricane came.
And my son does like an impression of Lin-Manuel Miranda, like doing bad historical rapping that I really like, but he never thinks enough through to actually get a rime. Like, it turns out my son is terrible at freestyling, even when he's trying to roast Lin-Manuel Miranda. He was here earlier today. We could have... Lin-Manuel Miranda?
No, Lin-Manuel Miranda hasn't been here in a week and a half, but your son was here, and we could have had him downstairs to do his bad rhymes.
It's true. He did not want to stick around to show off his impression.
No, such a teen.
Yes. So he is one of the most hurricane conscious founding fathers?
I think so.
Because he was in the middle of one?
Yeah, well, because he grew up
the middle would be good. He was on the edge of one.
On the edge of one. He grew up in the Caribbean, and so he had firsthand experience where probably George Washington had less experience. Certainly, John Adams had less experience with hurricanes.
Boston gets fewer hurricanes than Nevis.
And so he, Alexander Hamilton, in July of 1794, which a lot of people will think of first, the end of the French Revolution. You've got the Reign of Terror is ending.
Who was
right about there.
people's sexiest man alive that year?
It was Robespierre. But Alexander Hamilton petitions the U.S. Congress to build a lighthouse at Cape Hatteras. And of course, Hatteras.
You are kind of putting the ass back in.
Hatteras. It takes the Congress a little bit of time, as so often happens. But
I like in the old days how it was the Congress.
The Congress.
We don't say that anymore.
No, we don't say
today. We just were
Ukraine.
Like those clowns in Congress. But back then they would say those harlequins in the Congress.
In the Congress.
Yeah, it's good.
In 1802, they did fund the creation or the construction of a lighthouse. It was 112 feet above the sea, and it was.
That seems tall for 1802 or whatever you said.
Well, it was, except looking at the list of top lighthouses here, you'll see that let's see, in 1611 the Cordovan Lighthouse was 223 feet.
Oh, wow.
In, what's the next oldest, tallest lighthouse? We've got, in Poland in 1857. No, that's after the Cape Hatteras, the original Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Let's see, what are some of those ancient ones? How tall are they? Well, none of the ancient ones make the list of the top 30 lighthouses. But it was a tall lighthouse, but unfortunately, and during clear weather, the beacon was visible 18 miles out. But during inclement
you don't
weather,
need it in clear weather.
That's right. Inclement weather, it was not visible, partially because it was lit by whale oil.
Bad lens tech.
And bad lens tech, right. So ships continued to wash up on the shore.
Graveyard of the Atlantic.
One of the graveyards of the Atlantic.
Are there multiple graveyards of the Atlantic? Or
yeah, Cape Cod likes to claim to be the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Why are all these places bragging about?
A few graveyards of the Atlantic.
I'm so tired of these capes with their morbid brags.
I mean, what do you do? Do you put the number of ships up against one another, or
lives?
The lives, or is it like the prominence of the disaster?
I would just like brag about my saltwater taffy stores. I would leave it out. I would leave all the deaths out of it.
No,
if I was a tourism
wouldn't.
council.
Come on, the deaths are a big selling point.
What is a cape for if not to ram ships into?
We go over and over to places where deaths are either occurred or were memorialized, and saltwater taffy. I mean, who would do a tour of the United States from famous saltwater taffy place to famous saltwater taffy place?
That's true. It's kind of a thin premise for a vacation.
So the lighthouse, it did somewhat of its intended job, but in 1837, it was determined that there needed to be a second lighthouse, a little bit further south, and over time, the Bodie Island Lighthouse was constructed, but it was put on a shaky foundation. And it sort of
literally,
it sort of fell down over time, and they built a second one.
There's one thing you want in a lighthouse. It's for it not to fall down. It's inconvenient for the ships, but it's a bummer for the keeper.
Well, yeah, and the Bodie Island Lighthouse was even further out than the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. It was sort of a general bummer. It had a lot of problems over time.
Lighthouses are hard to supply, right? Because they're often approachable,
like we say,
only by dinghy and good seas, or maybe they're
on the fringe by design. And this is, the original lighthouse was, the appropriations for it came right at the same time as the appropriations for the very beginning of the U.S. Navy, right? We had only just devised a Navy. This was part of the sort of post-Revolutionary War American sense of itself, like, we're going to have an infrastructure. It was an initial infrastructure.
It was the first infrastructure week.
Yeah,
but you're saying it's also kind of military. I guess I hadn't thought about that. But this would be necessary for naval purposes too, right?
How do you maintain all the commerce, all of the sovereignty over your new 13 colonies if you cannot navigate your own shoals? And it became a military issue again during the Civil War, because this area of North Carolina was the site of the first naval battle of the Civil War.
Oh, really?
The naval battles of the Civil War, and control over this point was, in 1861, the Union Navy was already kind of bombarding the Confederates there. They were, had lesser artillery, and so weren't able to defend themselves against the Union. Just prior to the Civil War, the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse was improved. It was raised, and this is something that you see in lighthouses a lot. They raise the lighthouse. They build extra stories on it over time.
How is that possible?
Well,
do they lift up the top that's currently there?
They lift it up. They lift up the top, which seems like a...
So they keep... It's not that they build... It's not like they keep building up from the old top. They somehow build new stories of the new height of the lighthouse between the base and the lamp.
And in trying to figure out, like, how do you... Because lighthouses are... They're symmetrical, right? They're beautiful. They are usually some version of a conical sort of. They have a consistent proportion.
Yeah.
How would you go about?
Sure, and they're getting narrower as they go. Often is what you're saying. They're not a cylinder,
right?
They get narrower at the top.
And so, how are you gonna add 100 feet to a lighthouse? This
is a live question for you. If you're adding an eighth side to yours.
Well, that's right. I don't want to do that.
Oh, you've changed your mind.
No, I don't want to do that at all. But the old lighthouse just prior to the Civil War was the first site, or one of the first sites. We talked about the first Fresnel lens in the United States, and it was not Cape Hatteras, but one of the first Fresnel lenses to arrive in the United States was destined for the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse.
When is this? This is post-Civil War, this
No,
rebuild?
this is
okay.
pre-Civil War, so in the 1850s. And it was, it was such a technological evolution that the lens, the Fresnel lens, was actually sort of it was taken on a tour of the United States, like, look at this incredible thing, before it was installed in the original lighthouse.
I would do that. I'd go down to the train depot to see a lens come through.
Yeah, so would I, especially
of a Saturday.
Especially, think about the sort of the crystalline refractoriness of it. It would be a beautiful thing.
You would never see, like, back then it would be like if you and I were to see some 5-dimensional solid, like it would be like the best special effect anybody there ever saw.
It would be like seeing a 7-sided lighthouse made of dreams.
Exactly.
But the Fresnel lens was enough of a not just a thing of beauty, but a valuable instrument that as the Confederates realized they were going to lose control of Cape Hatteras, they went up into the lighthouse and dismantled the Fresnel lens and took it with them.
Yeah.
Boxed it up.
Dun, 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 dun.
And they kind of left the lighthouse bereft of its utility in the hopes that because there wasn't an effective Confederate Navy at that point, the only
bad ships you'll be crashing.
Exactly. The only ships to crash would be the Union warships that were pummeling their shore.
What happened to the lens? Did they ever get it back after the war?
Well, interestingly, the lens appeared to disappear. It was boxed up, crated up and hidden in some plantation barn or slave quarter, and the record went silent on the lens, and it appeared that it was a casualty of war, and I'll explain what actually happened to it in a little bit.
I'm interested. I want to know more.
In the 1860s, it was determined that the old lighthouse was no longer sufficient. It was no longer adequate, and so an appropriation was made for the construction of a new lighthouse, and it began in 1868, and by 1871, it was reputed to be the tallest in the world. Now, this is one of the problems that I've had in investigating lighthouse claims, because just like a lot of capes claim to be the graveyard of the Atlantic, even more lighthouses around the world claim to be the tallest lighthouse in the world.
This is not unique to lighthouses. Like I find that anytime you see a local claim like that, if you widen the scope, you will find 6 other localities making the same. I was trying to find out something interesting about Albany, New York the other day, which, believe me, is a thankless task.
The state capitol campus is an interesting example of brutalist architecture.
Someday to appear on Omnibus.
Oh, also the Sesame Street Museum is there in Albany.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they have the whole set of Sesame Street. Like,
why would that be in Albany?
Mr. Hooper's store, and
they shot it in Queens.
Oscar the Grouch's can. I don't know why it's in Albany. That's where they had the space for it.
I found Albany making 2 claims. One, that it was the site of America, is the terminus of America's first railway, and then another that was aviation related. And the first one turned out to be like totally false. Like it was the site of the first terminus of the first passenger railway, like in New York State. But to this day, like Albany is still claiming it's older than like B&O on its website, which is not true.
Really?
Yes. And I'm going to speak truth to power and say, Albany, just quit it. Just quit it. Wikipedia doesn't agree with you on this. You are not the site of the first passenger railway in the United States.
Well, and this is the problem with the internet, right? How do we even know anything anymore, Ken? We don't have almanacs in our footlockers.
I can go to lighthouses and measure them, but I can't travel back in time to see if Albany had a passenger railway before Providence.
I mean, the lighthouse of Genoa in Italy is not only the tallest in the Mediterranean, but
made entirely of ziti.
It's quite a bit taller than the Cape Hatteras lighthouse.
And it appears to have been in use at the time.
It dates to 1543.
But maybe not at that height.
Well, now that's the thing. So you
I looked at that French one, and you're right. That one has been its current height since like 1782.
Yeah.
So that's, that clearly was never, Hatteras could never have been taller than it, right?
Well, and I don't see how it could have been taller than the Lighthouse of Genoa. It is the world's 3rd oldest lighthouse.
You're right. The current tower has been lit since 1543.
Yeah.
Well,
Come on.
I'm not saying that it's not under, like it hasn't been lit continuously.
Cape Hatteras no longer claims to be the tallest lighthouse in the world, although it is still the tallest in America, but it now is relegated to the 18th tallest lighthouse in the world, which isn't something you're going to put at the top of your brochure. That comes down somewhat lower.
But it is the tallest in the U.S., taller than anything in Oregon or Maine. That's interesting.
It is. It now is 200 feet tall, over 200 feet tall, and I think really fascinatingly, and this will play into the story later. When it was built, as they started to kind of try to build a lighthouse this big, they realized that this was before we had and by we I mean us, humanity, had pile drivers or the capacity to build a foundation for something this big in a sandy shoal.
Yeah, there weren't really skyscrapers in Manhattan bedrock that were that tall yet, let alone on a beach.
Right. I mean, this is a 12-story tall building, and so in trying to build a foundation for it on the beach, as soon as they dug a hole, not even anywhere close to down to rock, but just down to hard sand, it started to fill with seawater.
Look, I've dug a hole on a beach.
Yeah.
It fills with seawater like in 1 second.
Right.
It's so hard to build a lighthouse in that second.
And that's right. And it wouldn't be a stable lighthouse. And so the engineer who was charged with this responsibility, Dexter Stetson, he devised a foundation for the lighthouse that was actually, he put a bunch of pine logs, yellow pine beams that were 6x12 beams. I mean, this was back when you could find a tree big enough to find a 6 foot by 12 foot,
Wow.
Clear, whatever, enormous logs that he built. He constructed a matrix of them in a pond of fresh water so that the logs were underwater, but in fresh water, which preserved them. And then on the top of the logs put a layer of stone. And then on top of that was able to build this 200-foot tall lighthouse.
So the logs are basically like floating. They're like a pontoon for this lighthouse.
Well, it couldn't float because it couldn't, the lighthouse would be pretty tippy, but they, they were protected from
between the water and the lighthouse.
That's right. They're protected from the sea, and in such a way that the lighthouse, wouldn't subside into the sand and wouldn't be susceptible to the erosion. And this ends up helping the lighthouse in recent times, having been built this way. So the thing about the Outer Banks, or these shoals, is that they're constantly changing due to erosion. But it's what happens is the banks themselves are and have been over centuries moving inland because the outer edge of them gets eroded away, but the sand is deposited on the inner side. Here around Cape Hatteras, the area of sort of the sound in between the Outer Banks and the actual coast of the United States is called the Pamlico Sound, and I'm sure that there's some pronunciation of that that's very regional. Pamlico Sound.
Yeah,
I'm going to say Pamlico because why not?
I'm just not even going to look it up, and then people will tell us.
Yeah, Pamlico.
Make someone else do the work for a change.
But what happens is the sand gets moved from the outside to the inside, and so
the island effectively is on the march.
It's on the march, and I don't know what happens when it reaches the coastline, if it keeps marching, if it heads to Durham.
You just get an island of North Carolina wandering across the Piedmont. lost in
time and space. But when the original lighthouse was built, it was, what was it? 1,000 feet inland from the coast, and over the course of half a century, the coast was eroded, and until by the end of World War I, the lighthouse was only 120 feet from the sea.
It's good if you want beachfront property, but
bad for a lighthouse
bad
because
for the future of that lighthouse.
this little freshwater pond that was supporting it, if seawater got in, then the pine logs would be, would decay and the lighthouse would fall. And so in 1919, the Coast Guard abandoned the lighthouse, went up on a neighboring hill and built a new kind of crappy metal beacon then they put one of those
ugly but
functional.
Does the job.
And this is before, lighthouses were still very necessary at this point in time. And they put like a rotating aircraft beacon on this tower. And throughout then the early part of the 20th century, there was a beacon there, and the lighthouse was transferred to the Park Service, and it was just kind of left to rot.
These are like, I was just thinking about a 12-story building in a pre-elevator age. That's a little bit rough on the keeper. Every time he's got light-related business, he's got to climb up 12 stories on a little rickety spiral staircase.
Well, these days, climbing the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is like a thing that it's an exciting thing that you do as a tourist.
Sure. Not my wife. She's terrified of spiral staircases.
What? Really?
Yeah, it's her greatest fear.
Just spiral staircases.
Not spirals, not staircases, just spiral staircases.
What about at the water tower in Volunteer Park?
She doesn't love it, but the thing about that one is it's on a bigger...
It's a broad spiral staircase.
Yeah, the circle being described is larger. She doesn't like... I think she grew up going around little tiny European turrets where it's like stone.
Yeah.
That's, and then you can see above you, the stone is not sitting on anything.
Right.
Every time you're on those stairs, you can look up and see the stairs you're about to be on and realize they're not sitting on anything. Plus, I guess her dad would always be, knew she was afraid of them and was always poking and teasing her.
He was up around throwing basketballs down, so she was just like dodging.
Just hilariously trying to knock her off the stairs.
Dodging balls. Isn't that
But yes, I
interesting?
like going up lighthouses.
What if you one day surprised her by buying a cool Manhattan loft that was 2 stories tall and had a spiral staircase between the two stories? And you were like, honey, we're moving to New York and it's going to be great. We're going to eat in fancy restaurants every night. But to get to bed, we have to go up this very small sort of cast iron spiral staircase.
I'm a real Bluebird figure here.
Yeah, well,
Bluebeard figure.
What would she say? What if you were up there throwing super balls down as she tried to come up to bed?
Yeah, she would probably cut a no Super Bowl deal, but I think she could do it if she had to.
Well, let me tell you more about the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse.
That's what I want.
It was kind of left decrepit.
The old one.
Yeah, the old one. Until World War II came along, and then all of a sudden the Coast Guard was interested in it because they could see, or they thought they could see some, use it as a submarine lookout. And then after the war, they'd built several sort of structures off the coast to keep erosion from washing the whole front of the Cape away. Mm-hmm. And those remediating efforts had succeeded enough that all of a sudden the lighthouse wasn't in danger anymore, and they kind of moved back in and started using it again. And that lasted until, it was sort of in and out of style to use the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. And the lighthouse, I should say, is painted in a very distinctive spiral paint job. It's a black and white spiral.
That's unusual for a lighthouse.
It is, and it was
it's like a barber pole. Does it spin?
It's a barber pole, but it doesn't spin. Mm-hmm. And it has a black and white spiral. And this was part of an infrastructural system. All the lighthouses along the coast had not only different spirals, but different flashing patterns to their lights.
So at night, you can tell by the pattern.
Or by the flash.
And by day, you can tell by the actual striping.
You can look and have a sense of which lighthouse you're looking at.
Well, presumably by day, you could also look over there and be like, oh, that's Cape Hatteras.
Right, but shifting shoals, shifting shoals.
Shifting shoals, man.
And as a sailor, and I know you're a sailor.
Yeah, call me Dr. Shoals.
looking at a lighthouse from out at sea, it's often hard to tell, hard to orient, especially.
Sea captain's not the sharpest knives in the hold.
Oh dear, you're insulting the sea captains now.
Well, they need to have different stripes apparently, or they don't know where on the coastline they are.
It's usually, I don't think, the captain. It's probably some sort of guy up in a crow's nest.
In the crow's nest. Some dumb Kevin up there.
Yeah, some young guy who's
striped lighthouse ahoy.
I think it might be Cape Hatteras. I'm not sure. Well, by the 1990s, the water had again eroded Cape Hatteras, and to this point, or at this point, eroded it so that there was no saving the lighthouse.
Oh, in the 1990s.
In the 1990s, the water came within 15 feet of the base of the lighthouse, and it was only a matter of the next hurricane.
And to be clear, this is not the one they use anymore because now there's a metal beacon.
Oh, no, they're still using it at this point because they'd reverted to it.
Oh, okay.
And it had been automated. I mean, there was no longer a lighthouse keeper up there spinning it around with his hand crank.
But are there tourists climbing up there in the summer?
There were, and it was by this point a national treasure, and so there were a lot of suggestions, and it was a whole process. One of these situations where the more people that you invite into the decision-making process, the more insane it becomes.
Save the clock tower.
And they built a retaining wall around it, such that, and they proposed a much larger one, such that it would ultimately become an island. The water would erode the sand around it, and then the lighthouse would be sitting out there in the middle of the sound, which would have been cool, but wouldn't have been a permanent solution because, again, the water table would eventually kind of rot the basin. And it had been proposed to move the lighthouse for a long time, to
Kansas.
To move it to Kansas.
Where it'll be completely safe from the waves.
Fill it with saltwater taffy and make it a place like the Corn Palace or Wall Drug, a place you absolutely had to stop. To move it inland and to put it in a location, again, further from you're just
kicking the lighthouse down the road.
Yeah, you're moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's all going to be underwater one day soon. But it was it was rejected for a long time because this is a 200-foot brick lighthouse built on a pine foundation.
She's built like a 200-foot brick lighthouse.
There wasn't the technology for most of this time to move it. But by 1999, lighthouse moving technology had improved.
We all remember the advances in LMT at the time.
That's right, and so it was, although very controversial, it was decided that they were going to move the Cape Hatteras lighthouse, and like a little partnership between two companies, International Chimney, which, is one of the big chimney, we call them.
Tall, narrow things is their specialty.
And a company called Expert House Movers.
They just called Mayflower, basically.
Expert House Movers.
They rented a U-Haul to do this.
The two of them collaborated on taking the lighthouse, which again wasn't connected to the rock, and they built a whole lighthouse moving operation.
I guess lighthouse is a house. It's in the name.
It's right in the name.
They move any kind of house,
and they moved it. They moved it 2,900 feet inland.
Wow!
And along with the lighthouse, moved like 7 other structures, including the lighthouse keeper's house, and the lighthouse keeper's outhouse, and the lighthouse keeper's doghouse. All of the houses that were around the lighthouse.
Can I ask, did they move the lighthouse intact?
Yes.
Or not in a series of slices or segments?
The lighthouse has 1,250,000 bricks, and somehow they managed to, and they moved it in by inches. Every day they were like, okay, let's take it another
Because otherwise
inch.
you just get tired.
Well, yeah, and it was mules. They basically moved it with mules. No, it was, expert house movers. They are experts at this.
I literally cannot picture how this would go.
International Chimney. They've done this 1,000 times.
Do you think they put it up on blocks or something?
Yeah, they built a little structure under it and they moved it very slowly.
Because if you move it fast, something might fall.
And it didn't have to go up a big hill. They
lens might
tried,
break.
when they reoriented it, they not only oriented the 7 buildings around it in exactly their relative positions, but they moved it to a place where the lighthouse was the same height and the same orientation to the sea that it had been before. So the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse now sits 2,000 feet from where it was built.
Half a mile away.
Yeah, it's still 210 feet tall, I guess, 18th tallest lighthouse in the world.
It's nowhere near the ocean, so no one can see it.
And if you want, no, that's not true because it's got, it doesn't have its Fresnel lens. And here's where the Fresnel lens story gets interesting.
You totally hit the ball and I forgot the Fresnel lens.
For, the lens was thought to be missing until 2002 when a filmmaker by the name of Kevin Duffus, I'm not going to say his last name is Doofus, it's Duffus, decided that this was going to be his mission. This was going to be his visiting of Wall Drug. He was going to scour the National Archives to see if there was if he could trace the location of this missing Fresnel lens that had been dismantled by the Confederates.
By the way, you're saying it like Fresno, but we decided it was French before. We said Fresnel in the last episode.
Oh, Fresnel lens.
I can't remember.
Fresnel.
I know it doesn't have an S.
Fresnel. Boy, I should be able to keep my own episodes of Omnibus straight.
At least the lighthouse themed ones.
I'm sure there were listeners, futurelings throughout this episode going, "What is he doing?" You're right. It's the Fresnel lens.
I think
that's what we were saying. Thank you for correcting me.
So Kevin Doofus.
So Kevin Doofus of the Fresnel lens.
Doofus Kevin, we call him.
Maybe what we should do is ask our editor Mark Miles to go back and
snip out the S.
Put me saying Fresnel in every instance.
Just jump a fraction of a second so the S is gone. So you'll be like the Fresnel lens. Fresnel.
So Mr. Duffus, in scouring the National Archives, and encountering several dead ends where, parts of the lens were in a warehouse somewhere, parts of the lens were out in North Carolina in somebody's barn. He finally discovered in his research that actually the Fresnel lens had been returned to the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in 1870 and nobody wrote it down.
Wait, what?
So it had been there the whole time.
It was hiding in plain sight.
It was hiding in plain sight.
They assumed that the lens that was up there was some kind of later addition.
Yeah.
But in fact,
it was the Fresnel lens.
Do you think he's disappointed because he wants to do a documentary where he digs it out of a barn or something?
Well, that would have been.
It turns out the work had been done a century earlier.
That would have been fun. But I think he was also. I mean, that's pretty good. Turns out, and he wrote a book about it. And the thing is, the lens did not survive to the present day. When the lighthouse was originally decommissioned, and left to rot in the early, in between the wars, people got in there, they dismantled the lens, souvenir hunters and vandals and scavengers. So the lens had been dismantled. The lens did actually get sent was in various places. And as of the recording of this story, the National Park Service is trying to reassemble the lens and, has a call out to people like, if you have a part of the lighthouse lens in your junk drawer.
So it literally because it's made of these concentric things.
Mm-hmm.
And so different of those circles are in different places. Some of them are lost.
A lot of them are lost. Huh. And it's, so any futureling that's listening to this episode,
go through all your Fresnel lens parts and see if any of them could possibly be.
And please return them to the National Park Service.
Or send them to us at Omnibus, P.O. Box 55744 Shoreline.
And we will return them to the National Park Service.
Yeah, we're good citizens.
But you can even now visit the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, and climbing it is part of the fun. It's, like I say, it's 237 steps. That's 12 stories tall. And I think maybe COVID has potentially closed the lighthouse, but it's a go at your own pace climb. You have to be 42 inches tall to do it. You can't wear high heels or take an umbrella.
There seem like there's a lot of rules.
There are. I think you can't be.
I want to go to a more chill lighthouse.
Can't be heavier than 260 pounds. So I'm right at the edge.
Wow.
And you can't throw any kind of basketball or super ball down the stairs at people coming up behind you.
And that concludes Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Entry 182.PS4303, certificate number 6374, in the Omnibus. Now, Futurelings, presumably the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse was just the first example of buildings having to move inland. Soon all of America's buildings will be pressing toward the central parts of their respective states, right?
Right. Everything in America will be just on...
the Statue of Liberty is going to be in...
Move to Denver.
Yonkers.
Yeah. No. We're going to move everything to the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains, and there, presumably at 5,000 feet, it will be protected.
It's going to be like the only place in Waterworld where everyone can live. That place will also have like Cristo Redentor and the Statue of Liberty, and Mount Rushmore somehow is going to move there.
One of the very interesting things about the geography of the Plains states is that the entire center of the United States is a giant slope. And at the Mississippi, it's there at its lowest point, not far above sea level. But by the time you get to New Mexico, you've gone up 5,000-6,000 feet.
And you are feeling it on your bike.
You really are. You're a mile high, and the whole way it looked flat. You're driving along, it's just like, oh, there's nothing out here. It's just flat. But if you put a Super Ball down
in Denver,
and it would roll. By the time it'd be at critical speed.
It would be accumulating other stuff along the way, like a snowball. It would be a giant Super Ball by the time it just flattened New Orleans.
Do you feel like the ground of the Plain States is made out of Super Ball material?
It's made out of something that sticky Super Balls could pick up.
Yeah,
probably. But much as our building, we were still building things stupidly on the coast in our time. We were also social media denizens who were at Omnibus Project. You can look us up, add us to your list of accounts that you like or follow or share or whatever that is.
Please do.
I'm at Ken Jennings. You can find at John Roderick on Patreon.
There's no at, though.
Well, what are they going to put? You think they're going to put the word at John Roderick?
Yeah, maybe. It's just patreon.com.
Let me remind our dumber future listeners not to put the letters AT before the username.
I'd like dumb Kevin to subscribe just as much as anyone else.
Filmmaker Kevin Doofus or whatever, the historian guy. I hope you're listening, Kevin. We, speaking of Patreon, Omnibus has its own Patreon. The main thing that keeps the show running is the dedication and generosity of our listeners.
Especially now that you lost out on that Hot Jeopardy gig.
Yeah, before I would have just funneled all my salary into a money-losing podcast. And now that's not even an option.
Yeah, I thought I was half expecting you were going to start supporting me with a little bit of a, a
little kickback?
Yeah, a little kickback, a little bit of like, it's like going on tour and paying for the tour bus, even though the band isn't making that much money.
It's probably better for the show that I didn't get the Jeopardy gig. Yeah. Not because I don't have any free time, but just because now this is not the like.
It keeps our relationship honest.
Well, it's not. This is now not 100th less lucrative than my other job. So, so if you listen to the show.
Which presumably you do.
You're at least listening to this sentence for some reason. If you enjoy the show, but for some reason you've thought, the Patreon is for others to subsidize my hobby, now might be the time to check out patreon.com/omnibus project. Among the remarkable perks available to our more generous donors is the ability to suggest topics for episodes. And we have 2 2 Lighthouse-loving listeners, and that's why there have been 2 Lighthouse-centric episodes. Aaron suggested the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse.
I've taken responsibility for both of the Lighthouse episodes. The third one we do, it's on you, my friend.
Well, Aaron also suggested a modernist cuisine as a topic for a show, which is actually a pretty good idea and very Seattle-centric.
It is. We have lots of places that serve nothing but pickled corn and pickled grass.
Well, Nathan Myhrvold, the kind of modern pioneer of molecular gastronomy, is a
Pickler?
an East Side guy? He's from Mercer Island or something, I think.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned Kurt Timmermeister on the show before.
I've met Kurt and his delicious cheeses.
His delicious ice cream, but also his wonderful home-cooked meals.
But he doesn't make like foams and jellies out of meats and vegetables and serve them in floating balloons.
No, he was one of the early farm to table people who would have big dinners, and the only thing that he didn't grow on his Vashon Island farm, he didn't provide the salt, the sugar, or the wine, or the coffee. Those 4 things.
I feel like he could have done salt. I mean, sugar and coffee, sure. Nothing that tropic about, where does he live, Vashon? Nothing that tropic about Vashon. But, surely he could go out and...
Stop calling me Shirley.
Surely he could go out and find salt.
Somewhere, right. Dig a hole, fill it with water, wait for the salt.
Go to the sand, go to the beach, dig a hole, wait for the salt.
Yeah.
Come on,
just,
Kurt.
Just, you recycle cow waste. There's salt in it. Has to be.
So thank you, Aaron, for suggesting the show. And I think also molecular gastronomy is actually a pretty good show idea. We kind of backed into this one because we had a mix-up on show topics today. But I think you might be getting 2 for 1, Aaron. You can email us at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You can send us physical items. Where's that thing you were crinkling? Here it is. For example, this arrived in the mail from... somebody bought us something on eBay. It's got the name of the eBay seller on it.
Okay.
John, who may or may not be the...
Thanks, eBay friend.
Listener who sent us this. I don't have my...
Here, I've got some.
I don't have the knife on my keys because I didn't bring my keys. Over here.
Well, I've got this giant slide rule that was given to us by the...
I don't think it has a knife.
It's daughter of John Bernier.
It's not a Swiss Army slide rule. This would be a good show. Listen to 2 people try to open a different...
Do you want to use my
envelope
keys?
Every time. Yeah, maybe keys.
Here you go. 1, 2, 3. Oh, good catch.
Oh,
Don't let anybody say you're not an athlete.
I always wonder who puts the American flag and the bald eagle on their keys. Like, who gets that key blank? And now I know.
Who does it turn out to be?
It's you.
That's right. The American flag eagle key blank is my house key.
So if you ever steal John's keys, that's how you get into his place.
Oh, it looks like a bag inside a bag.
It looks like a book or maybe one of those fake books that you put alcohol in.
There's a bag inside a bag inside a bag.
Well, it's an eBay seller, so he's thorough.
I bought some bathroom fixtures from an eBay seller that just put all these porcelain things in a box, and they all broke. All right, thank you.
I believe I know what this is.
I thought when you threw those to me that you were throwing me what was in the bag, and I was like, those look exactly like my keys.
It is a Harvard Classics edition with that delightful old book smell.
Surely you have a collection of Harvard
from
Classics.
1980. I actually don't.
I used to.
But this, you did. Do you not have those anymore?
I bet I do. They're in a box.
This is Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, kind of a seafaring adventure classic.
I at one point I said, I'm going to read all the Harvard Classics. I didn't get that
You
far.
haven't been to all the Starbucks.
No.
And you haven't read all the... I wonder, I don't know if John, the eBay seller, is the one who sent us this. Who ordered us... I'm going to have to check our email. Thank you, anonymous.
This is a leather-bound edition, which is nice.
Thank you, anonymous listener who wanted us to read 2 Years Before the Mast.
1980.
We would probably know more about the maritime topics of the Lighthouse shows if we had read it. But
at least how to pronounce the Fresnel lens, something that I not that long ago did an episode.
If you would like to send us, if you would like to buy us weird things on eBay, please do. P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155, and look for the Futurelings wherever Futurelings are sold online. It's fun to have friends who listen to the same podcast as you, because then you don't have to pretend you're our friends. You can be real friends with users of these sites.
It's fun to have friends. That's the Omnibus motto.
It's fun to have fun, but you have to know how.
We should have that as our next t-shirt. Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.